Thank you for joining the session. If you're here, you're probably part of the DPO office or security services or data security of your company. And today we're going to talk about one of the challenges, which is classifying sensitive data or classifying sensitive data at scale and how to connect that to your threat defense and incident response framework. Hi, my name is Guy Gutman. I'm a security architect at AWS. With me today on stage, we'll have Roy Harouche and Matan Ophir from Wix. And they're going to tell us about how Wix solved that problem or challenge of data classification and how they connect that to their threat defense and incident response framework. So today we're going to talk about first the challenge. The challenge of data classification is between the business and the technology. It's not just technology. So using whatever tool that you have is not enough. So we'll talk about the challenge first, and then we'll talk about how to handle sensitive data at scale. And then we're going to talk about how to identify and prepare for data classification changes within your workloads. And then Wix is going to come up and tell their story about how they deal with sensitive data and how they connect that to their threat defense and incident response framework. So let's talk about the challenge of it and how it looks like. So if we talk about sensitive data or classification of data, we need to talk about several things. Today, the data is scattered. It's coming from multiple sources. So we have a lot of sources within our workloads. We have SaaS providers that provide data that we consume. And that data is coming from a lot of areas. Also, the velocity in which the data is created, generated, and actually formatted or changed is very high. With that said, we need the right people or the right knowledge and the right skill set in order to look at that amount of data in this amount of velocity. And that takes a lot of effort from our side, from the business side, in order to create that. Also, within our organization today, within your organization, you probably have a lot of areas which data is being created at. So we have dependencies, interdependencies, and intradependencies between different data sets that are being created across the organization. So those are the four challenges that we deal with in the modern era of cloud. Talking about that, let's talk about sensitive data. Sensitive data is anything that you define as sensitive data, okay? It can come from multiple areas, that definition. It can come from your policies, your data policies. It can come from regulation, which is the law. It can come from a lot of different aspects. So connecting the previous challenges, let's talk about the need to protect sensitive data at scale. In the current productivity trend that we see, the volume of data is growing, and it's growing by multipliers. With that said, connecting that to the velocity of data, that's a big challenge that we need to solve. Another challenge is the regulations, right? We have a lot of regulations coming in, especially in the last several years. According to the UN Conference of Trading last year, in summer, 71% of countries across the globe have set up some kind of sensitive data regulation. And we have to cope with that. You have to cope with that all the time. So you need to know how your data looks like and what is the sensitive data you're protecting. With that, you have to invest. You have to invest probably run rate and build rate to know how your data look like and what exactly you're protecting. What are the assets you're protecting? So that requires some kind of investment. It has to be in place. With all that said about challenges, we need to understand what the context is. Because if we have an asset, right, the business is defining the context of that asset. So the context could be either of two that we're talking about here. One is data privacy and regulatory compliance, which is mostly challenge that you deal with as law requirements, or data security, which is the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of that data. Without that, the business is going to be impacted. So what do we do in order to handle sensitive data at scale? In 2017, we've introduced Amazon Macie. Amazon Macie is a service that uses pattern matching, machine learning, in order to identify sensitive data at scale. It integrates directly with S3, which is the data source, and it will help you to identify sensitive data at scale. In 2020, we've reintroduced Macie after getting feedbacks from you, from our customers, and how Macie should act in order to help you identify sensitive data. So what Macie does, Macie is integrated directly with S3. Since it's integrated directly with S3, it identifies your bucket security first and foremost. It identifies the inventory of data that is being stored within your S3 buckets across your entire organization. It identifies different security aspects of your bucket. So do you or you do not have public access to those buckets? The bucket is encrypting the objects, yes or no? And what are the actual policies that appear within this bucket in the sense of resource-based policy? Also, a feature that we've introduced not long ago is automated sensitive data discovery. So right at the start, right from the get-go, you will get an indication about potential sensitive data within your buckets. Also, when we run actual jobs, scan jobs within Macie, those scan jobs are highly flexible and can help you cope with what you define as sensitive data. So it comes right away, right out of the box, with a set of managed identifiers that you can use in order to identify sensitive data. You can set the time frame in which those jobs would run and identify the sensitive data within your buckets. But also, and most important, is the fact that Macie will allow you to define your own sensitive data identifiers. So it will give you high flexibility in what you define as sensitive data. With that said, there's another nice and good feature that you can use. Macie collects the information about the sensitive data findings into a results S3 buckets. So we've added another feature that is called reveal sensitive data findings that you can use. This using an API call, you can get the actual textual finding and use it the way you'd like. So you've got a proof where the sensitive data is, you can do something with it. Macie also supports many textual formats as well. It supports Parquet. It supports also compressed files or compressed objects. that it can help you look into. With that said, Macie is also connected to organization. It's integrated with organization. So from a single place, you can control the actual jobs, you can control the identifiers, and you can see the results from a single place, which is good for your organization. Also, Macie has a set of APIs, of management APIs you can use as a managed service. And as a managed service, you don't have limits at the amount of data it can scan. It can scan any amount of data. It scales automatically. You don't need to deal with any scale questions that you might have. And with that said, Macie also have an SDK. So you can incorporate Macie directly into your code if you want to run sensitive data discovery just as part of your code, of your application. So let's say Macie had discovered the sensitive data. We want to do something about it, right? So we have the discoveries. We understand what's going on, or we don't. And we want to do something about it. So Macie can help you act in several ways. One of those ways, by using EventBridge, which is our open bus for event management. You can send information to Jira or Slack for the appropriate team to do something about this sensitive data. So not fully automatically, but still helps to deal with the question of what kind of sensitive data we find and what we do with that. By using S3 as a service, you can also tag buckets that has sensitive data in them in order to do something with that information later. You can put that into a workflow that will help you deal with the sensitive data later in the game, or by whatever data policy that you have. Macie is collecting sensitive data findings in a JSON line format into the findings bucket. So by using the JSON, you can create data sets by using Amazon Athena. And on top of that data set, you can create visualization using Amazon QuickSight. This way, you can have a full dashboard to see where your sensitive data is located and what's being done with it. Also, you can take any action that you want, again, by using EventBridge, and then integrating Lambda or step functions into the game. So those Lambda or step functions can do something with this data. Anonymize it, move it from place to place, delete it, or anything else you choose. So just to summarize what Macie can be used for, the use cases, we can talk about, first, assessing your data privacy and security at all times. So Macie would help you do that close to real time. So you can cope with the ever-changing environment that your workload is presenting. Also, as I said before, talking about regulatory compliance, you want to answer those regulatory compliance as soon as possible. So you want to understand what kind of sensitive data you're dealing with. That will help us as well. So talking about GDPR, for example, as a very wide kind of regulation, or even the California Consumer Privacy Act, which is kind of local, right? So you want to have the tools to deal with those regulations as closer to real time as possible. Also, when you do migration to AWS, you can use temporary buckets. Using those temporary buckets, you can move data into those buckets, scan it with Macie, and tag them to deal with afterwards, or deal with at the same time that you're doing the migration in. So use temporary buckets and then tag them and then do something with the sensitive data afterwards or during the process. So overall, we've talked about the essence of how we run actions on top of those findings. Let's talk about it a little bit more. So as we have the findings coming in from all types like PII, credential, financial information, banking information that's being discovered by Macie, we can do something about it. So the basic stuff I would look at first would be using Amazon Athena. Straight on the findings bucket, you can run analysis queries on top of those findings, which is a bit straightforward. And then taking action, you can integrate directly with Event Bridge that would run either step function or Lambda. But in order to create more context, maybe what you want to do is use those findings in Security Hub. Security Hub is our single pane of glass for your security posture and your compliance within your workloads. So Security Hub would bring information and findings from other sources as well. That would put more context into the sensitive data findings that Macie is pushing into Security Hub. If we want to go a step further, on 30th of May, we had Security Lake generally available. And Security Lake will collect all this information in a normalized way within the context of Open Cybersecurity Framework. And that Open Cybersecurity Framework is normalized. So every source that push information into Security Lake will have the same kind of shape of the information it pushes. So this way, by using third-party SIEM, for example, you can analyze the information that is being pushed into Security Lake and gain some more context and correlation to other events that are happening within your workload in context and in relation to that sensitive data finding, to those sensitive data findings. So comes the question, can we use more sources than just S3? The answer is yes. So some customers, or you, might choose to use other AWS services to digest data from other sources other than S3 into an S3 bucket and scan them with Macie. So you'll have, for example, we can digest information from relational database service, from Amazon RDS or DynamoDB by using services like Glue or database migration service as well. Those can be used by invoking culinary filters, for example. You can choose the information you want or sample the information from those data sources, push it into a bucket and scan it with Macie. For example, if we look at RDS, with RDS I would use DMS with culinary filtering, push the information into the data bucket or the sensitive data findings, and that would come in a parquet formation that Macie supports. Macie will scan that parquet, and then we can do something about it on our operational chain. With that said, we can also use AWS Glue Data Catalog to connect the information or the sensitive data findings that we find back to the original data source, which is our RDS. So some customers would choose to use AWS services. Some customers would choose to use one of our partners that do data classification for them. But some customers would choose to build their own sensitive data findings framework and connect that to their threat defense and incident response. One of those customers is Wix, and I'd like to call to the stage Roy. that will talk about how Wix are doing it with that heavy burden. Thank you.
Check, check. Awesome. Thank you, Guy, and thanks to everyone for joining. Welcome. My name is Roy, and I'm from Wix Security. And today, we're going to talk about how we manage to leverage Amazon Macie, not just for PII discovery or classification for data governance, but also how we manage to integrate all of this information from Macie into some of our other security platforms and matrices, like for threat detection, for risk management, etc. Before diving into what we did with Macie, let's talk about a very sad reality that we're all facing, which is the imbalance between security and R&D. At Wix, we have a very large R&D organization, and we come to R&D with a lot of demands. And they have other demands. They want to develop in very high velocity. We want to imply as many security controls as we want. We want to scan more sources. They want to deploy more into production. So there is always a very high friction between security and R&D. And today we're going to talk how we manage to allow Wix to continue to develop at high velocity, but also develop our own system that allows them to do so without losing any security controls or data security practices along the way. Let's talk about Wix before we dive into PII and security. Anyone here knows about Wix? Knows what Wix is? Raise of hands. All right, cool. So Wix is a website builder, amongst other things. You can open an e-com store on Wix. You can start taking bookings for your hotel or reservation, for your restaurants. You can do a lot of things on Wix. We have a lot of business proposals. You can even go and actually build a startup on Wix. We have a system or a product called Velo, and you can write your own backend and front-end code. You can have your own cloud databases on Wix. We even have a few of those startups running on Wix. Number-wise, we have over 240 million registered users. We deploy to production about 95,000 times a day. And we take in 30 petabytes of data per day. So that's quite a lot of data coming into our system. Wix is a complex company. We have a lot of business units. We run on multiple cloud providers. We run almost on all of them. And we have a lot of data sources. So not only the fact that Wix operates on a very large scale, we have about 30 different business units at Wix, which are called Wix companies, and each company has their own management. They have a different agenda. They have developers, and they have DevOps engineers. And they work decentralized so they can move faster. Matan forgot to turn off the Slack notification. Apologies. So I know some of you go through your day basically prioritizing alerts, right? You might have different types of alerts. You have data alerts, risk alerts, threat alerts. Some of you might even have red alerts. We also had to deal with a lot of alerts before we build our own solution. And we got kind of tired of handling alerts manually. The triaging all of these alerts becomes very tiresome at some point. And the fact that Wix has so many business units, so many different companies, means that we have to find a unified risk system so we don't have to build like 30 different security teams. So we built Harpy. Harpy is a custom-built security tool that we built in-house. It's not a CSPM, as you might think further along the way. It's a risk management system that collects, identifies, aggregates, correlates, and visualizes risk across all of the company. It also allows us to create actionable alerts from all of the infrastructure that we own, on-premise and in the cloud. At Wix Security, we are data hungry. We realized a long time ago that the more information we can identify, the better we can aggregate, the more efficiently we can correlate and visualize. So Harpy is essentially a system that takes in information from all layers of Wix, from identity and access management systems, from cybersecurity products, from essentially any source that we can identify in the company, and it correlates all of this information into a unified form. So we can answer some very important questions. We can answer what is important to Wix. We can answer what do I protect? Maybe more importantly, why don't I protect and why don't I protect it? When we have an issue delivered to R&D for a solution or for remediation, this issue is already triaged. It contains all of the relevant information, so we don't have to keep going back and forth with the R&D counterpart. Before going into Harpy, let's talk about some of the challenges that we encountered when we moved from centralizing all of this data into the phase of risk hunting and threat prioritization. We started from gathering information from our on-premise and cloud providers, from identity and access management systems. Then we moved into the workload layer. We started aggregating information from containers, EC2s, processes, what GitHub repo is running on what host. Then we turned that into an asset management system, which allows us to create a lot of alerts, configuration alerts, vulnerability alerts, and identity and access management alerts. Taking all of this into account, we can build a more logical way or framework to understand risk. And this actually allows us going from centralization into risk hunting and threat prioritization. Aggregating all of this data also provides us with two other important capabilities. We can reflect risk to everyone at Wix. The SLA becomes very clear when people all speak the same language. We found that the best security solutions are the ones that provide valuable information, also to security, but also to the DevOps teams. Now, some of you might ask, why go and build a CSPM application in-house? The fact is that Harpy is not just a CSPM. It's actually a risk assessment tool that is able to collect information from all of Wix and provide insights that a third party just cannot provide to us. So Harpy is not just a custom-built CSPM. It's a risk management tool that aggregates information from the user layer to the EC2 to a physical server. It can identify issues using relations, and it can collect and correlate attack paths based on those relations. Because if we're being honest, a CSPM vendor can't really assess a risk based on the layers that they see. Any of those risks that you see in front of you can be mitigated in any of those paths. You can resolve a CVE, you can change an IMDSV issue, you can even encrypt the data. But CSPM cannot see all of this information. So how do we further extend our ability to enrich our threat and defense matrices and empower our incident response and risk teams? I would like to invite Matan to the stage to discuss how we manage to enrich Harpy with additional data.
Thank you, Roy. So to summarize, Wix have developed an exceptional tool that allows us to gain a visibility into our distributed infrastructure. These tools enable us to construct attack flows based on various factors, such as misconfiguration, vulnerability management, and identity misconfiguration. By doing so, we gain even valuable insight into our infrastructure risk. But as a security team, we often find ourselves dealing with multitude of alerts. This is primarily because we overlook one of the critical aspects, which is sensitive data. In the following slide, I will show you how we at Wix approach this matter and created a tailored solution. But prior to embarking our journey, it is crucial to establish our clear goals. One of our primary objectives is to implement a comprehensive scanning mechanism that covers our entire technology stack. By doing so, we aim to enhance our visibility and gain even deeper insight into our infrastructure. So we built a solution that we call HAR, which stands for Mountain in Hebrew, of PII, HAR PII. So what is our PII project? First, we needed to define our main problems that we would like to solve. As a data-driven company, Wix is generating a lot of data on a daily basis, 30 petabytes a day. The challenge, however, is not just the volume of the data, but also the velocity which is produced. To keep up with the pace, companies must ensure that they are able to analyze, store at a high speed without compromising any security aspects, especially given the tight regulation in place. So we set up several ground rules that we would like the solution to support. First, we needed to be able to support various of data sources. And since Wix, we are using almost any type of data source. For example, native data sources like S3 bucket and RDS, but also unmanaged data sources like MySQL, Mongo, and etc. This is in addition to different file types like JSON files that we will discuss later on. But this is very crucial for us. We also looked for a solution that will have APIs and tagging mechanisms, so we can control and initiate scanning based on our business needs and preserve our cost budget. And last, ensuring that we are not exposing any of our sensitive data. While we are searching for different solutions on vendors, the third party required access from their unauthorized environment into ours, which obviously raises our supply chain risk, which we didn't want to. And so by combining all of our, we chose Amazon Macie as a proper solution that meets our requirements. So you may be wondering now how Harpy works. This process can be divided into 4 distinct parts. First, we start with a mapping of data sources. This is very essential. Roy mentioned earlier. Secondly, we configure the data fetching process, which is performed by our data engine. This engine is responsible for deriving the object type and fetching the data accordingly, which I will explain in the next few slides. Thirdly, we have our scanning engine, which is responsible for scheduling the sampling and the incremental scanning using Macie. And finally, we have our results. So after we receive the results from Macie, we attach it to the corresponding asset and trigger alerts based on the criticality of the scan. The outcome is an end-to-end process using Harpy for data discovery and mapping, and Harpy AI for data classification and data management that will allow us to have comprehensive of data scanning and understanding where are sensitive data. Now that we have our high-level understanding of the process, let's dive deeper into each of these parts to explore their inner workloads. So to enhance visibility into our cloud infrastructure, we adopted an approach that involves aggregating all assets, including managed and unmanaged services, structured and unstructured data sources. By using a SUM role and service account, we are able to fetch the data and pull it back into Harpy. For each asset, we develop a tracking form that captured critical information, such as asset type, scan type, and authentication type. This enables us to manage our asset even better. Now that we have successfully aggregated all of our assets, we can move on to the data pooling process. This process can be divided into two types, depending on the data source. For data that is being object stored, we can leverage their change capabilities, tracking capabilities, to fetch only the latest data based on whether it's being added, modified, or deleted. For data sources that cannot be easily tracked, we're doing periodic scanning to ensure that we have the latest up-to-date data. The challenge, however, that we encounter is the inability of Macie to push SQL data. To overcome this challenge, we created a mechanism that migrates the SQL data into a JSON file format. Then we will transfer into Macie for further analysis. And finally, all the metadata associated with the scanning process is stored into our data engine, providing a comprehensive record of all activity performed on our assets. With the data sources in place, the next step is to configure the scanning process. We leverage Amazon Macie in our organization to define the scan for each account. At Wix, we develop a scanning matrix that takes into consideration various factors, such as cost effectiveness, performance, and security coverage. This matrix is being fine-tuned on a regular basis to ensure we have a perfect balance between security and our Wix business needs. As a security, we control the scanning mechanism. So we can define whether to have a full scan or don't scan at all. One of a Macie key feature is the ability to provide a scan cost prediction, enabling us to assess the cost of the scan relative to the security aspect. This feature is useful to establish scanning metrics and ensuring the effectiveness of cost management. And last, we collect a result and data classification using the API and add those findings back into Harpy, where it's being stored and providing a contextual understanding of our risks. After Macie completed scan, we generate their finding based on the asset's criticality. We initiate the mitigation process. This process involves tagging sensitive data and triggering alerts. Alerts in Slack, in Jira, you can choose whatever depending on, again, the criticality and prioritization. A good example to this use case will be to notify legal team or the DPO whenever we're going to find PII data that is stored in an unsecure environment, or whether it's unencrypted. And so we needed to either remove that or encrypt it. Moreover, we can trigger an event that will send us to our SIEM solution to further investigation by our SOC team, which can be much faster remediation process and use it in an effective manner. So by integrating all those measures into our overall security framework, we are better equipped to detect and respond for potential threat, mitigate risk, and protect our asset from being compromised. Here is an example of potential alert that Harpy AI can generate. In this specific use case, you can see we identified an instance that is publicly accessible on the internet and possesses a remote code execution vulnerability. This vulnerability can allow attacker to gain potential foothold using this vulnerability into our infrastructure. Moreover, due to the attach policy, the permission of the policy that attaches the instance can take over other instances, as you can see, control PII or even PCI data. This example underscores the critical importance of proactive security measure and continuous monitoring. By leveraging the insight provided by Harpy AI, we can detect, mitigate vulnerabilities promptly, ensuring that the integrity, confidentiality of our sensitive data. In conclusion, we have successfully developed an automated tool powered by Macie that facilitates efficient discovery and management of our assets. This comprehensive solution encompasses a multitude of components seamlessly orchestrated by our internal developed system we call Harpy. We take a great pride in this achievement as it empowers us to effectively safeguard our valuable assets. Moving forward, we will continue to enhance and refine the technology stack and ensure robust data security and management practices into our organization. Despite the progress that we have made, there are still further investments we would like to achieve. The next focus is to develop even further adapters, including SaaS applications such as Google Drive and Slack. And by doing so, we are increasing and understanding more of our ecosystem and where our data reside. Furthermore, we would like to be able to identify high string entropies in our data set, using a mechanism that will validate those strings, and we can easily notify the respective owners of those credentials. We also would like to have a self-service scan, so our developers will be able to push data and understand whether there's a risk or not. And hopefully, we'll enter that into their developing cycles. And also to improve our processes, scanning processes, we would like to enhance and minimize the mean time to scan. By optimizing this framework, we will expedite the identification of vulnerabilities and mitigate it promptly. Lastly, to reinforce, unattended, our security measures, we seek to integrate all of those findings and tagging from our scanning processes into our zero trust solution. So whenever we're going to find a vulnerability or some sort of risk, we're able to restrict the access or block it for anyone to be able to access it and could be a very potential attacker. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Roy. Thank you, Matan. So we've seen Wix's story, how they act as a small security team with a diverse changes of workloads and activities they have in the company. Thinking about the current productivity trend and the current economical atmosphere that we see, we saw how Macie can help you get your sensitive data results and do something about it at scale. So teams can choose using Macie and then doing something about it in 3 different ways. As I said before, one is filtering data from other data sources, push it into Macie and do something with it on your threat defense and incident response framework that you have already in place. Second is to use one of our partners to do that. And third, you can do what Wix did. Also, Macie has a free trial of 30 days, so go ahead and use it. Try to use it as an engine to discover your sensitive data. Of course, as I said before, Macie or any service that you use is not a magic. It has to come with a defined data policy and how you deal with sensitive data. With that said, I would like to thank you all for coming here today. Please fill out the survey so we know how to improve ourselves better for the next time. Thank you.